Good day. This is a presentation from the Office of Special Education Services Fiscal and Grants Management Team for the Advisory Council. Your presenters today are Michelle Williams-Young, Team Lead for Fiscal and Grants Management, and Marlene Metz, Consultant. At the end of this presentation, we hope that you will have a better understanding of the fiscal side of IDEA, including fiscal requirements. The agenda for today's presentation includes source of IDEA funds, the allocation formula, purpose of IDEA funds, the IDEA state application, information on how South Carolina budgets its IDEA funds, the grants to states formula, current year budget data, and historical budget data. The Office of Special Education Services in the South Carolina Department of Education receives funds from IDEA Part B.
Compliance with the fiscal requirements of IDEA can seem complex and confusing. IDEA is a formula grant or entitlement. State education agencies, SEAs, must demonstrate eligibility annually. The same applies to LEAs. Since the awards have a period of performance of 27 months, there will be 3 open grants at certain periods of the year. While preparing the application for new awards, we are closing out 1 award and monitoring 2 active awards. This same situation exists for LEAs, who are the subrecipients of these funds.
Let's start with some common fiscal acronyms. SEA stands for State Education Agency, which in this case is the South Carolina State Department of Education. LEA stands for Local Education Agency, which is the entity that is responsible for providing a free, appropriate public education and is sometimes referred to as a school district. MFS refers to the state maintenance of fiscal support. LEA maintenance of effort is referred to as MOE. PPPSC refers to parentally placed private school children. CEIS represents Coordinated Early Intervening Services. And CCEIS refers to Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervening Services. The purpose of IDEA Part B funds are to ensure a free, appropriate public education, to ensure that the rights of children and their parents are protected, to assist states, localities, LEAs, and federal agencies in providing for the education of all children with disabilities, and to assess and ensure the effectiveness of efforts to educate children with disabilities. Every eligible state or outlying area receives an annual grant under IDEA Section 611 to support special education and related services for children ages 3 through 21. All eligible states and the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico also receive IDEA Section 619 grants to support special education and related services for children ages 3 through 5. State total grants under 611 are calculated in accordance with several factors, starting with each state receiving an allocation in an amount equal to the amount it received for fiscal year 1999. 85% of the remaining funds are allocated on the relative population of children in that state ages 3 through 21. And then the remaining 15% of funds are allocated based on the relative population of children living in poverty who are in the age range for which the state ensures the availability of FAPE. To be eligible to receive IDEA funds, annually each state must submit an application which must be made available for public comment. The application includes assurances of compliance with all IDA requirements, an interactive spreadsheet showing the proposed allocation of state set-aside funds for administration and state-level activities, as well as evidence of compliance with Section 427, the General Education Provisions Act. After the period of public notice and consideration of comments, the SEA submits the application, including fiscal data demonstrating compliance with the state maintenance of fiscal support requirement, as well as noting changes to the state's procedures for determining significant disproportionality. The application is submitted to the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSIP, and must be approved prior to making the grant award. The state receives two allocations: the 619 or preschool IDEA grant for ages 3 through 5, and the 611 or what we term the big IDEA grant for ages 3 through 21. This picture demonstrates how funds are allocated for both the 611 and 619 grants. Remember that the annual grants run on a 27-month cycle. Each year, a grants to states table is issued by the Office of Special Education Programs and indicates the maximum amounts that each state can allocate to administration and state set-aside. In addition, the table indicates the minimum amount that must be flowed through to LEAs. LEA allocations include a base payment amount that is determined by the amount the LEA would have received under IDEA if the state had distributed 75% of its FFY 1999 funds. The remaining amount is 85% based on total public and private school enrollment, and 15% allocated based on the number of children living in poverty. Each state may reserve a limited amount of its Section 611 and Section 619 grant funds for state administration of the IDEA Part B program and for other state-level activities. These are commonly referred to as state set-aside funds. Some state-level activities are required, such as monitoring, enforcement, and complaint investigation, as well as to establish and implement the mediation process, including cost of mediators and support personnel. Other activities shown are discretionary and may include to support and improve the use of technology for children with disabilities, providing technical assistance, and personnel preparation. Next, we'll talk about how South Carolina uses IDEA funds from a numbers perspective. In this chart and bar graph, we show total state level allocations per year for the IDEA 611 grant, shown in blue, as well as the flow through to LEAs, shown in orange. The total allocation in South Carolina has increased annually in most years. Note that in FFY 21, state fiscal year 22, all states received one-time American Rescue Plan COVID relief funding. On this chart and graph, you can also see that South Carolina flows through more than 90% of its IDA funds to LEAs and uses less than 10% for administration and state level activities for special education and related services. This pie chart shows the full state allocation, including flow-through to LEAs, and how state-level funding was expended for 2021, which was the most recently closed-out grant. As you can see, 91.81% flowed through to LEAs, 3.93% was for contractual services, and 2.24% was for state level salaries. These charts show the full state allocation, including flow-through to LEAs, and how state-level funding has been expended on average over the last five. Oh, boo, boo, boo. These charts show the full state allocation, including flow-through to LEAs, and how state-level funding has been expended on average over the last 5-year period, which includes federal fiscal year 18, state fiscal year 19, through federal fiscal year 22, state fiscal year 23, which is the most recently closed out grant year. As you can see, 92.39% flowed through to LEAs. 5.06% was expended on contractual services supporting LEAs, and a total of 2.36% was expended on a combination of salaries and fringe benefits. This pie chart shows the same year, FY21, but does not include the LEA allocations. So here we're just focused on expenditures of state level funds. As you can see, contractual services was 47.96% of state level expenditures. Salaries were 27.29%, and the fringe benefits were 11.08%. This chart shows the same 5-year average as the previous slide, but does not include LEA allocations, opening up the pie chart to show more detail on state level activities. Focusing on state level expenditures, you can see that on average, South Carolina expends 61% of state level funding on contractual services to support LEAs. We expended 20% on salaries, 8% on supplies, and less than 1% on travel. This chart shows state level activities by category. Recall that earlier we spoke about the state application where we needed to budget and we were required to budget in certain areas, but other areas were optional. So here we can see that the highest category for state level activities is LEA shortages, followed by monitoring and then LEA capacity building. Some examples of the projects that South Carolina uses state set-aside funds to support include ASK, the Academic Alliance of South Carolina, which was created to support the Office of Special Education Services in building local infrastructure and capacity in order to improve education and functional outcomes for children with disabilities. BASC, the Behavioral Alliance of South Carolina, which seeks to build capacity for supporting students with or at risk of developing emotional disabilities and to promote positive impacts across social, health, emotional, behavioral, and academic areas of student function. TASK, the Transition Alliance of South Carolina, was developed to improve post-secondary outcomes for youth with disabilities in South Carolina. And SCDE, the South Carolina Partnership for Inclusion, is focused on creating inclusive opportunities and school readiness for preschool children with disabilities.
Local education agencies, or LEAs, are subrecipients of IDEA funding. Fiscal oversight and monitoring is a part of the SEA's general supervision requirement under IDEA. You might hear these terms as part of fiscal responsibilities. We call them the Big Eight. In addition to the state grant application and budget, and the maintenance of fiscal support requirement, which have been discussed previously, we are also responsible for preparing allocations and determining each LEA's eligibility, documenting compliance with excess cost, maintenance of effort, and proportionate share requirements, and also conducting fiscal monitoring. FGM conducts fiscal monitoring through a multi-tiered approach. As appropriate, the team also reviews and monitors the use of funds for CEIS, or Coordinated Early Intervening Services, which are voluntary for districts, and Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervening Services, or CCEIS, which could be mandatory for some districts. Earlier, we discussed the purpose of IDEA funds. In determining if an expenditure is allowable under IDEA, we look to our definition of special education found in the regulations. Special education means specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of a child with disabilities. The regulations further describe related services which may be needed for the student to benefit from special education. Students in charter schools are entitled to these same services. In South Carolina, we have 3 charter LEAs. We also have charter schools that are part of traditional districts. In other states, you might find charter schools that are single LEAs, but that does not exist in South Carolina. Excess cost is one of the IDEA fiscal requirements that must be documented in order for a district to have an approvable application. Excess cost can be most simply explained as the district's responsibility to expend at least as much on students with disabilities as they have on all students on average prior to accessing IDEA funds. And this is because IDEA is an excess cost entitlement. It was never intended to pay the full cost of special education. It is intended to supplement state, local, and other federal funds. LEA maintenance of effort, or MOE, is an IDEA fiscal requirement that a district must budget and expend at least as much from state and local funds for special education and related services as it did in the most recently available year. There are 2 standards for MOE. One is eligibility and one is compliance. In order to be eligible to receive a new award, we must have demonstrated evidence to show that a district has budgeted sufficient funds to meet their MOE requirement. Parentally placed private school children, or PPPSC. IDEA has a requirement that a proportionate share of each LEA's allocation be used to provide equitable services to parentally placed private school children with disabilities. This is different from the requirement to provide a free appropriate public education to those students in public schools. Not all private school children will be eligible for equitable services, but all must be included in the calculation of the proportionate share. Coordinated Early Intervening Services, or CEIS, is voluntary, and the only time IDEA funds may be used for non-disabled students. An LEA may decide to use up to 15% of the total 611 and 619 allocation on services for non-disabled students who need additional academic or behavioral support. Students served must be within the grades of K through 12, but there is an emphasis on K through 3. A plan must be included in the district's application. CCEIS, or Comprehensive Coordinated Early Intervening Services, is the term that describes the mandatory expenditure of 15% of the 611 and 619 allocation to address an LEA's determination of significant disproportionality. In this case, the LEA works with OSIS program staff to design an acceptable plan for CCEIS. This plan will be submitted with the IDEA application to ensure that funds are budgeted and expended for the approved activities.
We have touched on many of the fiscal requirements of IDEA, but shown is a more comprehensive list of the responsibilities of the Fiscal and Grants Management Team in ensuring compliance with federal, state, and programmatic regulations, including the LEA applications, special projects, the grants accounting processing system, fiscal monitoring, LEA financial aid, parentally placed private school children, maintenance of state fiscal support, federal reporting, contracts and special projects, as well as management decisions. We hope that this presentation has given the Advisory Council a better understanding of IDEA from a fiscal perspective.